I wanted to share a story with you about something that happened to me back in the winter of 2021. I was having a rough time between a rough breakup, the stress of work and family, not to mention the state of the world at that time. I wanted to get away but not spend too much money, so I resorted to staying at this old cabin that my uncle owned. I'd gone there plenty of times as a kid with my family and I loved it. It was secluded, no one else around for miles, surrounded by nothing but trees. All of us kids got older and visited less, so he opened it up to anyone in the family if they wanted to use it. I asked him if anyone was there, and since it was free, I told him I was going to use it for the weekend, and he told me where to find the key. But it's what I experienced there that changed the way I felt about that once quiet getaway. The first few days were uneventful, which was perfect. I went hiking around the property one day and tried to identify some animal tracks that I found in the snow. I gathered some of my own firewood, chopping it up like I remember doing as a kid. Then I made myself food, and I ate by the fire with a book. The only electronic I had was my phone, and service was non-existent out there anyways, so it was like I was completely unplugged, and I loved it. I was enjoying the silence, and already feeling better and more centered. On the third night, I was on the back patio smoking before I got ready for bed. It was no longer snowing, but there was a good couple of inches on the ground at that point. The air was completely still, no wind. It was one of those silent winter nights, and I loved it. As I stood on the patio, I started hearing what sounded like whistling coming from the tree line about 50 yards away. At first, when I wasn't giving it my full attention, I thought it was random whistles. But then I could make out a distinct melody. This was some kind of tune, but I couldn't quite place it. My first thought was that it may have been a hunter, maybe someone else who lived in one of the other cabins, and maybe they got lost or were just passing through the property lines. It was still in the dead of winter and at night, so I called out to them asking if they were okay. The whistling stopped immediately. I waited, thinking maybe they were about to respond, maybe they were trying to find where the talking was coming from, maybe they were just going to walk up to the cabin instead. But then there was nothing. After a few minutes of nothing, I figured maybe I had spooked them or they had moved on. I stayed where I was to finish my smoke before going back in, but then the whistling started up again. This time it was coming from a different spot in the tree line, a little further to the left of where I first heard it. This time I didn't call out. Since it moved, I figured they probably didn't know where I was. Maybe I did spook them. Or maybe they didn't even hear me and continued to walk by. I didn't call out again, but instead just listened. The same melody was being whistled. It would stop in the same spot and then repeat. It did this 3 times. It was almost eerie not seeing where it was coming from and having it repeat, so I put out my cigarette and went back in early. I got ready for bed and made my place on the couch by the fire. There were 3 bedrooms, but it was warmer by the fire, so I just decided to sleep there. As I started to drift off, I started hearing that whistling again. I opened my eyes and listened again to the tune. It sounded really close at that point, which was quite frankly a bit alarming. And to be as loud and clear as it was, it had to be close to the cabin, which meant that it was too close. This was still private property. I could understand hunters getting lost or just wanting to walk through, but to be that close to the cabin was not okay. I got up and turned on the outside light and opened the front door. The whistling was just as loud, but I couldn't see a single thing out there. No signs of anyone. I tried the back door, same result. The whistling also sounded just as close from the front and the back. Then I heard the sounds of a branch or something snapping like someone walked over it. At that point, I was getting a bit freaked out. There was no way the person couldn't see me standing in the porch lights, yet I couldn't see them. And out there, it was highly likely that they had some kind of weapon on them. I shouted that this was private property and that they shouldn't be here, and again the whistling stopped. I listened again and I could hear the crunch of snow under someone's shoes. Then the whistling started again, but this time it sounded like it was coming from behind me, inside the cabin. I swung around and there was nothing there. No one. I shut the door, locking it, and then I went and checked all the windows, grabbed the fire poker, and then locked myself in one of the bedrooms. This had gone from a therapeutic getaway to a creepy horror movie, and I was not having it. I stayed in that room the entire night, every little sound causing me to look around. I didn't sleep until I saw the sun come up. After just a couple hours of sleep, I got dressed and went to check the outside of the cabin. I don't know what I was expecting to find, but I was hoping for something to prove that I wasn't crazy. In the end, I found nothing. It hadn't snowed that night either, and there was no new accumulation anywhere. It was clear on the path that I made. My footprints were still visible on the back patio, and those were the only footprints. There were no footprints anywhere near the cabin. That was impossible. The whistling sounded close enough to sound like they were standing on the porch with me. There had to be footprints somewhere visible, so how was it possible that I couldn't see any? And that was the final straw for me. It was too freaky, so I left. I packed up, and once I got back home, I texted my uncle telling him that I left early, and he asked me if everything was all right. I explained the cabin was fine and considered not mentioning it to him, but he'd always been open-minded, so I decided to tell him. I started explaining how there was some weird stuff happening, and then his text stopped for about half an hour. I thought maybe he was thinking I was being dramatic and started feeling pretty silly myself. Then, he finally responded asking, "Was it the whistling?" I was shook. I didn't mention it, so he must have experienced the same thing. Did that mean that he knew who was doing it? Or that he experienced it too? After another 10 to 15 minutes, my uncle sent me a link to a video that I watched. To my shock, it was the same tune that I heard at the cabin. It was Stardust by Hoagie Carmichael. The whistling part in the song was the exact tune that I heard out there. Listening to that in those dark woods, secluded and alone, it was terrifying. My uncle then called me and explained how he had heard the same whistling for years. He even said that my dad, his brother, witnessed it, but no one knows why it's happening, or even where it's coming from. The closest thought they had ever come to was that based on the area, there was an old logger business in the nearby vicinity back in the 20s. The building has since been torn down and the land sold, but my uncle thinks that maybe it was someone who worked there that may have died in an accident, or maybe got stuck in a blizzard and is now wandering those woods. I could believe that theory, because the fact that it sounded like it was coming from everywhere and there were no footprints, I don't know what else fits. I'm just relieved that the whistling wasn't in my head, that I wasn't going insane. But at the same time, I don't know which would be worse. But at least I know now if I go back out there, I'll at least have some tunes to look forward to. Hi, Raven. I love your channel. I'm not a native English speaker or writer, so please bear with me if there are any typos in my text. I apologize in advance for misspelling, but I really want to share my story with you. Or, more so, it's not my story, it's a story about my wife. Me and my wife are both sort of spiritual. Not religious much, but spiritual. I'm okay with your typos as long as you're okay with me butchering the German in this story. I tried to do pronounce on Google, but it wasn't working, so I have to do my best. My wife had a situation that she cannot explain all her life, and it's mind-boggling what she has experienced over the years. As a teenager, she performed Glasrücken, which is shoving jars, as it is very popular among young people in Germany. Glazarukin is quite similar to the use of a Ouija board that you most likely know in the US. It's pretty much the same. You place small notes with each letter in the alphabet on a table, as well as each number from 0 to 9, and the words ja for yes, nein for no, and auf Wiedersehen for goodbye on the table. The major difference between the American and English version and the German one is that you put a small jar upside down on the table, with everyone just putting their index finger on top of it, so that the spirits, or whatever, can move the jar to each letter and number. Anyway, now that I've explained the thing, I hope you get the idea. Here is what she experienced performing it. As I told you, she performed it as a teenager, so the questions that they asked moved more towards the issues that young adults are dealing with. On one occasion, they were performing it in one of her friend's bedroom. Now, just picture the usual teenager bedroom, like they are in the US, with a lot of mess lying around, a lot of posters hanging on the wall, and a small pack of girls kneeling on the floor, performing Glazaroken. As it progressed, the usual questions arose, like, who's in love with me? Who will I be in love with? Who's holding a grudge against me, and so on. Then, one of her female friends asked one question that differed from all the other questions, because it was addressed to the ghost directly. And she asked, "Where are you?" It's a simple question, so you might suspect a simple answer, right? Well, the glass moved and it spelled the words BEHIND behind, THE, the, EMINEM, M&M, POSTER, poster. Now you've got to understand that Eminem is a popular artist in Germany as well, so he's well known here too, but what left them speechless is what happened right afterwards. Right after the ghost finished talking, the girls turned their heads to the only Eminem poster in the room, and right as they did, one of the needles holding the poster on the wall fell off of the wall. A corner of the poster now leaned toward the girls, exposing the blank wall behind it. The girls obviously were in awe. Astronomical coincidence, you might say. Well, then let me tell you another one. On another occasion, they were performing it on a warm summer night outside their town hall that is a bit outside of the town that she lives in. Now, you've got to keep in mind they didn't do this in complete darkness, which will be important later. There were street lights and lights coming from the town hall all around them. She and her girlfriends were sitting there performing Glazaroken again, and it was the usual teenager stuff asked by the teenagers, until one of them met the ominous mistake of addressing the ghost directly again. She asked, "What is your name?" And the jar responded. It just spelled Satan, Satan. And as soon as it reached the letter N, there was a sudden bang, and all the lights around them just went off. Not just the streetlights above them, but also the lights coming from the town hall, and it was pitch black in the entire town. A full blackout that affected the area. The girls were terrified and left the place screaming in fear. They ran towards the center of the town when they saw that there was just one house not affected by the blackout. It was the house of my wife's parents. Her spiritual mother always warned them about performing Glazaroken, as she saw it as a tool of raising demons. The girls all went into the house and told my future mother-in-law what had happened, to which she replied with something like, "I told you so." On the third occasion they were performing it, in one of the girls' bedrooms, where they were trying to get to the bottom of things, they were trying to find out what actually moved the jar. So, they started Glazaroken again. But this time, one of the girls had to lift their index finger every few seconds, so that it was clear that none of the girls had moved the jar intentionally. As every time it was the usual questions about school or boys or something like that, with the exception that none of the girls were holding their index finger on the jar permanently. And what was striking is what then happened. From one second to another, the jar just rushed to the wall, striking it to 1,000 bits, as if it was thrown by force. It almost exploded on the wall. Needless to say, the girls were shocked and devastated. How can you ever explain or forget something like that? Now, my wife hasn't performed Gläserrücken afterwards as it was too intense for her. I know that this sounds like a made-up story, but I've honestly no doubt to believe her. She would swear on her life that this is all true. She wouldn't want to perform it nowadays because she believed that her naive, childish-like approach protected her somehow. We in Germany have a popular saying of Welpenschutz, which is puppy protection, that relates to someone's experience. It's basically saying that if you're young, clumsy, and unexperienced, you are going to have to be guided and protected by an organization or other people or the universe itself until you can stand on your own 2 feet. So she's basically saying the universe somehow guided or protected her so that these experiences didn't cause any actual harm to her. When we talk about the history of the United States, particularly the era of westward expansion into what was then called Indian Territory, Fort Leavenworth is one of the most prominent spots on the map. Known for being the oldest active military post west of the Mississippi River in the 1800s, it was one of the most important stops for any enterprising pioneer that had crossed the Mississippi and was on their way to make their fortune out west. The fort itself was established in 1827 by Henry Leavenworth and was originally known as Cantonment Leavenworth. During the fort's early days, its primary function was to secure the Santa Fe Trail, to help protect the fur trade that passed through the area and later on the Oregon Trail and the other various routes west that began to spring up. The soldiers at the fort were often the security detail for traders and wagon caravans that moved ever further into the uncharted wilderness of the West. And as such, there are no shortages of bloody conflict in the area. The lives of natives, soldiers, bandits, and pioneers ended on that soil. At one point, in May of 1829, the entire fort was evacuated by the military, and the Kickapoo tribe occupied it over the summer and into the fall of that year, when the army managed to recapture the fort. In 1839, Colonel Stephen Kearny would march against the Cherokee with the largest cavalry force ever assembled in U.S. history. 10 companies of dragoons, which would be between 1,000 and 2,000 mounted troops. By 1859, with the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the primary role of Fort Leavenworth shifted when it began doing its level best to keep the lid on the brewing troubles between pro-slavery and anti-slavery groups in the area during the time, known as the Bleeding Kansas era. It's also of note that in 1857 to 58, it was from Fort Leavenworth that General Albert Sidney Johnston rode out to bring the Mormons in Utah back under federal jurisdiction. During the Civil War, when the western outposts were undermanned, the local native tribes began regularly raiding the railroad encampments and attacking the crews sent to build the expanding artery to the west. Confederate prisoners of war were often conscripted to go into the wilds and combat these natives and bring an end to their raiding. The primary reason for the natives raiding the railroad so vigorously was the violation of multiple treaties by the U.S. government, who constantly failed to uphold their end of the bargain, and this increasingly ramped up tensions and hostilities among the tribes. During a period of less than 30 years, that's 1865 to 1891, the U.S. military at Fort Leavenworth engaged in no fewer than 100 battles with the Apache, the Cheyenne, the Modoc, the Kickapoo, and other tribes. It would be very remiss of me to not mention that the first 2 of all-black cavalry regiments were formed at Leavenworth in the days after the Civil War. The 9th and 10th Cavalry regiments were often sent to engage the native tribes in battle, and the natives held the men in high regards. They began referring to them as the Buffalo Soldiers, and, to this day, a monument honoring them stands at Leavenworth. It was in 1875 that the United States Disciplinary Barracks was established. This is one of the things that the fort is most known for, as it is the only maximum security prison within the Department of Defense, and services all branches of the military. Notably, it operates the same buildings from 1875 until 2002, when new barracks were established. The older barracks housed over 1,000 federal prisoners, while the newer barracks holds around 500. During the days after World War II, Leavenworth became the temporary home for Nazi POWs before their ultimate execution at the fort. Now that we've gone over some history, let's get into the good stuff, the hauntings. All of this has been to establish the context and the bloody history of the fort. With such a history, and more that I didn't touch upon for the sake of time and generally not droning on like this is a thesis paper, I think it comes as a surprise to no one that Fort Leavenworth is regarded as the most haunted, active military post on U.S. soil. While many of the old historic buildings still stand, the base itself has been quite thoroughly modernized, but the older parts are definitely seen as haunted. A good number of spirits and other ghostly happenings are said to take place on the old fort's grounds, with most of the spirits theorized to be those of executed prisoners or those that died while being housed in the barracks. Some are also thought to be from the National Cemetery that lies just beyond the walls. So, just for you, my dear audience, we've gone down the rabbit hole of the internet and found some examples of known hauntings on the old grounds. 1. The Ghostly Tea Party. At 624 Scott Avenue, the Chief of Staff's quarters are said to still host ghostly tea parties within the parlor. While there have yet to be any sightings of apparitions, there are steady streams of reports that say the noises of a tea party, a general chatter and clinking of dishes, can be heard from a completely empty parlor. 2. The Phantom Priest of St. Ignatius. In 1871, the first Catholic church, St. Ignatius, was built on the grounds. And in 1875, the church and attached rectory burned, claiming the life of the young priest who was assigned to said church. Many materials of the original church were salvaged and reused in the reconstruction of the building, and as such, the sight of many scorched bricks can be seen in the facade of the church. But another unprecedented carryover from the original building lingers in the form of young Father Fred, who is often spotted walking the building in his ethereal priest robes. In the 1970s, Father Fred's apparition even appeared in a photograph taken at a dinner party. 3. The Disgraced General. Perhaps one of the most nefarious figures in U.S. history is said to roam the old general's quarters located at 1 Scott Avenue. A General Armstrong Custer is said to roam the halls of the old residence. They say the attachment to Leavenworth is due to it being the location where he was court-martialed in 1867 for leaving his command and mistreating his troops. The hearing is said to have taken place in the general's quarters, where he was handed a 1-year suspension without pay. He was later reinstated and rejoined the 7th Cavalry in 1868, where he served until the disastrous battle at Little Bighorn in 1876. 4. The Haunted Towers. The area around the disciplinary barracks is ringed by a dozen watchtowers, and even before the barracks was closed, not all of these towers were manned. Over time, Tower 8, which has not been renovated in years, and was not manned at all during the later years of the barracks being open, has gained a reputation as being quite haunted. At a time when other towers were manned, Tower 8 was completely blocked from entry, and the only way to reach it was via the walkway connecting to another tower, and yet often the guards would report seeing movement in the tower. The control tower would even receive phone calls from Tower 8 despite it not having a phone installed. At one time, a patrol car reported a soldier manning the tower and pointing his rifle at them. The story goes that long ago a soldier ended his own life in the tower via a self-inflicted gunshot, and it sounds like even in the afterlife he still carries on his duties. 5. The Rookery. The Rookery is the oldest house on post, and has been continuously inhabited since its construction in 1832. It's said to have many ghostly occupants, and has earned the reputation as the most haunted house in Kansas. The most common apparition is that of a woman with flowing black hair that will rush people with her claws bared for an attack. Another of the ghostly inhabitants is a young girl that is often seen or heard having herself a right proper tantrum. There's also a chatty old woman often seen in the corner carrying on a conversation with another unseen person. Some people have also told stories of being roused from their sleep by an old man with bushy hair clad in a nightshirt. And 6, Sumner Place. This is less a specific house and more the entire neighborhood that is haunted by the benevolent spirit of an older woman in a woolen black dress with a shawl draped around her shoulders. The reports regarding her say that she was at one point a live-in nanny for a family that resided here, and she often tries to help the families in the neighborhood out by handling the domestic chores, such as washing the dishes or making the beds. The stories also say that she has a fondness for children and will often try to comfort ones that are in distress. A young boy once told his mother that the nice old lady would sit and read him bedtime stories when he couldn't sleep at night. These are just a few short examples of some of the ghostly going-ons at Fort Leavenworth. Visitors are more than welcome to come and explore the historic military post. The caveat being that any visitor over the age of 16 must have some kind of valid government ID, such as driver's license or state ID, and all vehicles are subject to a search before being granted entry onto the base. So, if you're ever in Kansas, like I once was, and feel like exploring a very historically interesting and supernaturally charged place, maybe stop by Fort Leavenworth and give old General Custer the finger for Tom and his ancestors. Okay, this is something that happened to me just last week, and I'm still freaking out. I need to know if anyone else has experienced something similar. I work for a local tech company in Colorado. Nothing exciting for you or me. I work at the corporate level of stuff, so it's actually pretty boring. My day-to-day work is pretty normal, and I rarely stray from my normal schedule. I even take the same route home because it's typically a straight shot on the highway. So, last Friday, I left the office around 6 p.m., same as always. I got on the entrance ramp for the highway and started my 40-minute drive home. I do tend to run into some slowdown on the highway, typically near other entry ramps, but nothing too crazy. But on this day, there seemed to be more of a backup than normal. We were now at a crawl. I remember being annoyed and confused, as there were no signs for construction, so either people were having trouble understanding how to merge and speed up when entering a highway, or there was an accident. I couldn't do anything about it, so I just turned up my music a bit and tried to relax, knowing that I was heading into a weekend. But then I started smelling something awful, like burning rubber mixed with something chemical. My first thought was that it just confirmed that there was probably an accident. As we inched forward slowly, barely moving 10 miles per hour, I finally saw the cause of the holdup. There was definitely an accident, but it was what I saw that was bizarre to me. The car was a dark gray 2018-ish Honda Civic, which was the same make and model and color of my own car. There was even a small dent in the rear bumper, and a Colorado Avalanche sticker on the back window just like mine. But the front end was completely destroyed, like it had plowed directly into something at high speeds. The hood was crumpled up, windshield shattered, and airbags deployed. This was a pretty bad accident, but there were no other cars on the side. The car looking identical to mine was crazy enough, but what really made me do a double take was the guy leaning against it. He looked just like me. Maybe not identical, but close enough that it was deeply unsettling. Same build, same haircut, short on sides, longer on top, wearing what looked like the exact outfit that I had on. A navy blue button-down with black slacks. A company uniform, or at least business casual. I was clearly doing what people normally do when they see an accident, and slow down even more to gawk at it, but my reason was completely different. It was like I was looking at myself in another dimension. And as I got closer, the guy made eye contact with me. He waved kind of casually at first, but then more urgently, like he needed to get my attention. I don't know why I did this, but I pulled over. This is not something I would normally do. I'm not the type to stop for strangers on the highway or side of the road. I always think about those horror stories of people who get carjacked that way, or even worse. But something told me that I needed to be there at that moment. He jogged up to my car, and I rolled down the window. I asked him if he was okay, and he nodded, saying that he was. His voice even sounded familiar. It didn't sound like mine, but like someone I've known forever. It's hard to explain. Then I asked if he needed a ride out of there. Again, I don't know why the hell I would have offered that. I don't ever offer rides to people. It was strange knowing that I just asked that, feeling compelled to, but also knowing that I shouldn't have. But the man's response was just as strange to me. He had this weird, subtle laugh and said, "From you? Nah, man, I'm good." What did he mean by, "from you"? I didn't know this guy, but maybe that's also why he didn't want to ride. So I asked him if he needed to call someone else, or if there was something I could do to help him out. I'll never forget his face when he looked at me with a pitiful smile and said, "I just need you to stay awake, Kevin." That hit me like a bucket of ice water. My name is Kevin. I hadn't told him that. It's not like I was wearing a name tag or something, so how did he know? I thought about this conversation and drove away, and as I thought about it more, I noticed just how tired I was feeling. Like, I was struggling to keep my eyes open, kind of tired. I started to not feel safe being on the highway that was now clear and told myself I needed to pull over, and then I woke up in my driveway. It was dark. I looked at my phone and it was 10 p.m. I have absolutely zero memory of driving home. None. I don't remember exiting the highway, stopping at the red light, or swerving to get around the giant pothole at the intersection. It's all just a complete blank. I sat there trying to process what had happened. Did I fall asleep at the wheel? If so, how did I get home safely? I've been on autopilot before, when you take the same path and have to stop to think if you stopped at that stop sign, or not remember just part of your drive. I have experienced that, but I typically remember getting to my destination, or some part of the drive. But I can't remember anything other than that accident. Then my heart dropped, thinking maybe I did fall asleep. Maybe that was my accident, and I was experiencing some kind of out-of-body thing. I jumped out of my car and looked around for damage, but the car was fine. It's still a little bump in the back, but otherwise, it was in perfect shape. I immediately grabbed my phone to check for accidents, and found nothing. After seeing my car and myself were physically fine, I went inside still feeling exhausted, and decided to go to bed. The next day, I checked the police reports and news again for accidents, and found nothing along the highway that I took. Did the accident not happen either? And how? I remember stopping, talking to the guy, smelling the fluids from the accident. Then there was what the guy told me, to stay awake. Was that a dream? A hallucination of some sort? Or the universe's way of telling me to stay awake? I still have no idea. I've told a few friends and my sister about what I experienced, and they all think it's just as bizarre. Some have joked about me being lucky and driving home half asleep, while others, like my sister, think I should go to the doctor to make sure there's nothing wrong with me. I'm still debating on that one, but nothing else like that has happened since. I've driven home all week and there were no issues. I didn't wake up in my driveway, there were no other accidents, and I never felt that tired again. So what did I experience that day? Was this just a dream? Was that guy from some other timeline stopping me from being in the same fate, or worse? I still have no answers, but I hope that it never happens again, because not knowing what happened, having half an hour completely missing, is one of the most terrifying things I have ever experienced. So that, my friends, was a collection of some unexplained horror stories, scary unexplained stories, stories that defy logic, or just really have no explanation. Typically supernatural, but not always supernatural. Sometimes just really strange stories that are creepy, to say the least. Genuinely enjoy these stories, and I want to say thank you to everyone who submitted their stories and to Tom for the write-up on Leavenworth. All of you people are amazing. You keep the channel going. I really and genuinely appreciate you. If you liked these stories and want more content like this, consider subscribing to the channel. You can also hit the like button on the video telling me you enjoyed this specific video. It also tells YouTube that you like my content and want to see more of it. It doesn't always work, but it's the best way to get my content. That alongside, like I said, subscribing, hitting that bell icon, changing it to always or all updates, that kind of thing. You can also join Patreon or memberships to get early access to content like this and other bonuses depending on what you sign up for. You can also pitch in with a super thanks. Never expected, always appreciated, but a couple dollars a month really does help. Way more than I could ever express. You can listen to the podcast in longer formats on Spotify, Audible, Apple, pretty much anywhere you get your podcasts at. I do have a merch store. It's linked down below. It's a T-Chip store. I have a few designs up there that are pretty cool. I also have a fourth wall store that I think YouTube still links. I don't even know if it does or not. But it's some cool stuff over there too. So, yeah. All that said, my friend, hope you have a beautiful rest of your week. Hope you're having a great week so far. Hope I see you again soon. But until then, remember, you are loved. You are valid. You are important. You're the best you that you can be. Don't forget it. Till next time, much love and sleep well.